The escalating tensions at sea has cast doubt on the second round of peace talks, with the ceasefire due to end in 2 days.
The Iranian state broadcaster RIB saying Tehran currently has no plans to participate in the next round of negotiations with Washington. A news agency, IRNA, said Iran has cited what it called Washington's excessive demands and continuing naval blockade for staying away from talks. Mr. Trump earlier said U.S. negotiators will head to Pakistan today to continue negotiations with Iran. Islamabad has yet to confirm the talks.
Dr. Peter Layton is visiting a fellow at the Griffith Asia Institute at Griffith University. He joins us this morning on the show. Dr. Layton, thanks so much, first of all, for talking to us. I'm wondering if you think, despite all the conflicting statements and the tensions, do you think the talks are going to go ahead? Because I guess the pressure and the motivations on both sides are very high.
I think there's a reasonable chance of the talks happening. As you say, sort of both sides want these talks. The Americans have to physically leave first because they are further away. So I would expect that the Iranians will turn up for the talks. The question, I suppose, is, of course, as you said, both sides are now taking fairly hardline positions. The Iranians have been bitten a couple of times before with these talks like this, and twice the Americans have attacked them halfway through the talks. So there will be a certain amount of reticence and perhaps getting themselves ready just in the off chance that the Americans are once more deceiving.
And even if they do go ahead, as you mentioned, there has been a significant development at sea. Just how much impact could this latest seizure incident could have on what comes out of the talks?
Again, I think it's sort of playing into the Iranians' hands about being fairly hard line. It's one of those issues of it's sort of having a ceasefire and yet at the same time seeing pictures of American ships firing on high Iranian civilian vessels is an unfortunate public relations crisis, let's say. So it doesn't look like much of a ceasefire. The Iranians clearly have very long-term plans for the Strait of Hormuz as far as keeping control of it. The Americans equally want to blockade back. So this is rather unhelpful, but I suppose it's sort of part of that bargaining tactics. The Iranians obviously organised the ship so that it tried the American blockade right now, just before the talks, just to see how things would go.
And Dr. Layton, I'm wondering, how much of the conflicting statements, and the rhetoric is down to maybe the dynamics of what's going on in Iran right now. We had the Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, taking one position, and then we had the IRGC Navy commander taking another position.
Yes, the assassination of the leadership group of Iran has certainly caused a certain amount of splintering, and that's another problem. Is that the leadership group has to stay dispersed now, and has to, if you like, and has to avoid talking to each other using some electronic means, such as mobile phones and the internet. So probably most of the leadership group doesn't necessarily know what the highest leaders want. So there'll be a certain amount of freelancing going on. That's another problem, of course. If you were in this leadership group, and if you have concerns the Americans and Israelis may end the talks by starting the war once more, you would be well aware that they will probably try and kill you immediately. So there's a lot of there must be a lot of personal tensions here, not just national tensions, if you like.
And definitely tensions at sea. It's been a volatile few days in the Strait with shifting access, the warning shots, and now that vessel seizure. So, Doctor, how close are we to a miscalculation that could trigger a major escalation there? And if the talks fail, then what happens to the Strait of Hormuz?
There would have to be assumed to be at least a 50-50 chance of the war restarting on say Thursday with a large-scale Israeli and American airstrikes. I can't see the war restarting with, say, land action or an amphibious landing, but certainly airstrikes are easy to sort of start and then finish once more and demonstrate how strong the Israelis and the The Americans are. Now, while the Americans have shelled this ship, and that's certainly a cause of tension, it's not as bad as it could be, perhaps. There's been a fair amount of making sure that no one is, that say, the Chinese Navy is not accompanying the Iranian vessel, bearing in mind that China gets a significant amount of oil from Iran. Had this involved a different power at, say, different times, there's a chance that the Chinese Navy may have sent some escort ship with this particular vessel, but that has not happened. So at the moment, it's still people are still being cautious, if you like.
Dr. Layton, I mean, the Strait is obviously the most visible of all the points of differences. So I want to ask you, behind the scenes, I mean, the US and Iran have been trading proposals, 20 years, 5 years, for example. We've heard reports about sanctions relief. We've heard reports about the unfreezing of Iranian assets, which apparently come up to about $20 billion US. Do you sense a mood for compromise on the part of both parties, a week since we heard the initial proposal of 20 versus 5?
Yes, I think in the background there has been a fair amount of movement, and there is room for a compromise. The difficulties from the American point of view will be getting the Israelis on board. The Iranians want something particularly difficult from the Israelis. They want the war to stop and not restart. The Israelis have been open since the start, since the middle of last year, was that they would like a rolling series of strikes every couple of years against Iran. The Israelis, from a military point of view, are very worried about Iran's ballistic missiles, and they wish to stop Iran making those ever again. To stop them making them ever again, because they will reconstitute their manufacturing relatively quickly. But to stop them doing that ever again, they want to, if you like, keep the war going. So I think it'll be quite difficult to stop the Israelis, or to get the Israelis on side. But there are a number of other issues, as you said, the enrichment, the sanctions. Clearly, the Iranians are still very keen about imposing a toll on ships using the Strait, and you'd have to say that's a fairly likely outcome at this stage.
And Dr. Layton, just want to quickly take this forward to the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. There is a New York Times report that says countries like Qatar are basically in strategic shock right now, having found that a close relationship with the US didn't help, nor did warming ties with Iran. It was attacked over 700 times. How do you see the region reframing and responding? I mean, what sort of processes are surely taking place right now in terms of looking towards the near future?
Yes, the Gulf states have realised that from an American point of view, they are not particularly influential, that Israel clearly holds all the cards, if you like. The Gulf states' future really depends upon peace returning to the Gulf, and then once again appearing as, if you like, the Switzerland of those particular regions, which are safe for the longer term. It's going to take a significant time before they get back to that happy situation, and repairing the damaged oil facilities will take several years as well, it would seem. I think it's sort of a lesson not just for the Gulf states, but for all American allies, partners and friends, if you like, that just because you are an ally, partner or friend does not necessarily mean that the Americans will sort of look after you during a conflict. The Gulf states tried very hard to be neutral. The Iranians would say, of course, that they weren't neutral because they had American bases and American fighter jets there. The Americans don't seem to have launched any strikes from the Gulf states, but they were hosting American facilities. But trying to stay neutral during a major regional war like this has obviously turned out to be very, very difficult. It's a lesson for all of us.
Okay, Dr. Layton, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your insight this morning. Dr. Peter Layton, visiting fellow of the Griffith Asia Institute at Griffith University.